double dose. Told you I might, and here I am. Once again, welcome to Mystery Unsolved. You know my name, you know my game, but what is tonight's episode on? Well, you should know that too if you just watched the last one. This episode is going to be on John Wilkes Booth. We all know who John Wilkes Booth is, unfortunately. He is the assassinator of one President Abraham Lincoln. But why is this a mystery? Well, therein lies the tale, ladies and gentlemen, because it is suggested and it has been claimed that John Wilkes Booth did not, in fact, run. Well, it's said that John Wilkes Booth ran to that warehouse, which we all know he did, broken leg and all, but that John Wilkes Booth did not die in that barn that he supposedly burned in. That he wasn't gunned down, that he didn't burn. John Wilkes Booth lived on past when he was caught. Is this true? Well, let's find out on tonight's Mystery Unsolved. First things first, let's meet one Finis Langdon Bates. He was an American lawyer and author of The Escape and Suicide of John Wilkes Booth. In this 309-page book, Bates claims that John Wilkes Booth, the assassin of the U.S. President Abraham Lincoln, was not murdered by Union Army soldiers on April 25, 1865, but successfully eluded together and lived for many years after under a series of assumed names, notably John St. Helen and David E. George. It is also fun to mention here that Finis Langdon Bates' granddaughter is Kathy Bates, the actress. How about that? Who had Kathy Bates being somehow linked to Abraham Lincoln on their bingo card? Huh? Look at that. It's made you check off something you didn't even have on your bingo card. All right. The Booth escape theory. John St. Helen. So I actually first heard this theory on Unsolved Mysteries back in the day. I've since heard it 3 more times on Unsolved Mysteries, the same episode. And the first thing that always gets me is who has the last name St. Helen? That's weird, right? Is it just me? Am I the only person that thinks St. Helen is a weird last name? I don't know. Anyway, according to The Escape and Suicide of John Wilkes Booth, in 1873, Bates met John St. Helen, a liquor and tobacco merchant in Granbury, Texas. Hey! Granbury, Texas. That's where the last guy, Frank Dalton, who claimed to be Jesse James, was. So it seems we have a pattern here in Granbury, Texas. Imposter syndrome. The man had a particular tendency toward the theatrical and could recite Shakespeare from memory. I mean, I like Shakespeare too. I can't recite it, but I mean, I imagine a lot of people can. Bates and St. Helen cultivated a friendship over 5 years. In 1878, St. Helen became ill, stating, "I am dying. My name is John Wilkes Booth, and I am the assassin of President Lincoln. Get the picture of myself from under the pillow. I leave it with you for my future identification. Notify my brother, Edwin Booth, of New York City." St. Helen later recovered and explained in greater detail. Whoa. So, on his deathbed, I know in movies and TV shows, and even in life, a lot of people on their deathbed will say crazy shit. This guy tops, probably at the time, most of them. In 1878, probably not a lot of juicy conspiracy deathbed, proclamations. So this guy says, "I am John Wilkes Booth." But then he recovers. Like, he later recovered. Like, wait, okay, thought he was dying, but all right. St. Helen later recovered and explained in greater detail. The leader of the conspiracy to assassinate Lincoln was Vice President Andrew Johnson. Oh, that's a good one. Andrew Johnson was probably one of the most despicable presidents. I know we had Trump, prior to Trump, if you will. Andrew Johnson was a bastard. When he was inaugurated as vice president, he was drunk. He had the most vetoes of any president. So anytime Johnson submitted a bill, it was vetoed. This was like no. Like there was at least like 47 times. That was actually later beaten by one George W. Bush. But yeah. So this John St. Helen is claiming the leader of the conspiracy to assassinate Lincoln was Vice President Andrew Johnson. You may also remember that Lincoln wasn't the only person to have supposedly. Lincoln wasn't the only person with a bounty on their head, if you will. Andrew Johnson was one, and there was another congressman. There was at least like four people. Andrew Johnson survived because I don't think he wasn't in his room. I forgot how it happened, but so yeah, John St. Helen is claiming that Andrew Johnson was the proprietor, the leader of the pact, if you will. The identity of the man mortally wounded in the Garrett tobacco barn by Thomas B. Boston Corbett was a plantation overseer by the name of Ruddy. St. Helen/Booth had asked Ruddy to fetch his papers, which had fallen out of his pocket while crossing the Rappahannock River. Ruddy was able to retrieve Booth's papers, and while still in possession of them, Ruddy was mortally wounded in the Garrett barn, thus leading his captors to believe that he was Booth. Shortly thereafter, St. Helen moved to Leadville, Colorado to pursue mining, and Bates moved to Memphis, losing track of St. Helen. Bates claimed not to have believed St. Helen's story at the time, calling it an unpleasant side of St. Helen's character. Bates described him as modest, unobtrusive, and conjugal, ever pleasant in association with me. He was a social favorite of mine, with all of whom he came in contact. Despite his claims of disbelief, in 1900, Bates wrote the War Department in an unsuccessful attempt to claim a $100,000 reward advertised following Lincoln's assassination. He also informed the Department of State. Bates also wrote the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, in early 1920s about his theory concerning Booth's proposed escape. David E. George. So this guy kind of looks like there's a picture of him. He kind of looks like John Wilkes Booth, but he kind of doesn't. David E. George, possibly David E. Lou George, a house painter with an appetite for drink and a knack for quoting Shakespeare. Apparently, if you quoted Shakespeare in 1865 and you look like John Wilkes Booth, you could probably latch onto that and write it for all it's worth. Committed suicide by ingesting poison on January 13, 1903, while staying at room number 4 in the Grand Avenue Hotel in Union, Oklahoma. Oklahoma. He had purchased the strychnine from strychnine, that'll do it, from the Watchman's drugstore, telling the clerk, Frank Corey, that he wanted to poison a dog who had kept him up the night before. Okay. If you went to your local pharmacy and asked for strychnine, first of all, they'd just straight up deny you. But if you took it a step further and said you wanted to poison a dog, they'd call the police on you. But apparently in 1903, they're like, oh, what do you need the strychnine for? Oh, well, I'm going to poison a dog. This dog had kept me up all night. Oh, all right. Well, here you go. What? Shortly thereafter, store owner Eugene Walters, unaware that his clerk had just sold George strychnine, provided additional strychnine to George's to poison a. Wait, what? Provided additional strychnine to George to poison a cat. What? What? Why? Apparently, it was okay in the early 1900s for you to go to your local pharmacy, and your pharmacist would be like, "Hey," you could say to your pharmacist, "Hey, I have an animal problem," and they'd be like, "Strychnine? Yeah, here you go." What? I think that's a mystery. The hell with the John Wilkes Booth? How about why were pharmacists giving strychnine willingly to kill animals? Dear God, what? What? Oh God, I'm baffled by that one. By 10:30 a.m. that morning, other tenants complained of hearing groans and moans in George's locked room. They managed their way into George's room and found him writhing in pain. Despite the efforts of Dr. Champion, the local doctor, the poison had claimed him by 11 a.m. that morning. Acting Coroner Joe S. Jacobs assembled a coroner's jury, which included Mayor Charles O. Wood, and determined that George had died of alcohol and poison-induced heart failure. No, I'm pretty sure it was a strychnine, which is the poison. Like, oh, but he had alcohol in his system. Yeah, you have bigger problems, like your pharmacist providing strychnine willingly to kill animals. Oh, God. Shortly after George's death, Methodist Episcopal minister, try saying that 5 times fast, Reverend Enoch Covert Harper, Jesus Christ, his name, came to view the body and relate to a story to William H. Ryan, who was embalming the body. In April 1900, while staying in El Reno, Oklahoma, George had reportedly confessed to Mrs. Jessie Mae Kuhn, who was soon to be Harper's second wife, that he was John Wilkes Booth. The man goes to his pharmacy to get strychnine. He's apparently an alcoholic. Why would you believe anything that comes out of this man? Why? I'll tell you why. This isn't the 30s or the 40s, but apparently also in the early 1900s, people were insanely gullible. Mrs. Kuhn had dismissed the confessions as the product of a drug-induced delivery. Okay. Maybe Mrs. Kuhn isn't maybe she isn't all that gullible. George was also quoted as saying, "I killed the best man that ever lived." Hmm. Shortly after George's death, Dr. R. W. Baker examined the body and x-rayed it, but refused to reveal his results on ethical grounds. So this doctor's like giving into the mystery more. Doctor, what did you find? Can't tell you. Ethical grounds. Oh, I'll never know. George's body was sent to Undertaker William Broadwell Penniman, who hesitated to have him buried until the body could be claimed. On December 31st, 1902, George had drawn up a will with local lawyer Niles Houston, and it was filed with Judge Milton Garber on January 16th, 1903. However, the property listed in the will ultimately proved non-existent, and the body remained unclaimed and unburied at Penniman. Huh. The arsenic-embalmed body sat for 8 years, dear Lord, on display in Enid at Penniman's establishment. Wow, what? The arsenic-embalmed body. First of all, that sentence is amazing. The arsenic-embalmed body. I might use that for a horror story. Sat for 8 years on a display in Enid at Penniman's establishment. Penniman had tied the body to a chair, opened its eyes, and placed a newspaper in its lap, creating a spectacle for passerby in Enid downtown. We have a sick, deranged P.T. Barnum on the loose in 1903, apparently. As a young boy, writer Marquis James led dime tours into funeral homes to view the mummified body where it lay on a shelf. According to Penniman, 10,000 people viewed George's body during the time in Enid, including a few who clipped hair, buttons, and one even attempted to remove his ear. Oh, wow. I didn't think this one was going to be interesting, and holy shit, was I wrong. Are you entertained? Are you not entertained? Is that not why you are here? Oh my god, this is way more than I ever thought it was going to be. Other papers found on George requested Finis Bates to be summoned. On January 23, 1903, Bates identified the body as that of his old acquaintance, John St. Helen. Ultimately, with no one else to claim it, the body ended up in Bates's care. Bates stored it in the garage of his home, located at 1234 1234 Hubbard Avenue in Memphis, Tennessee, and toured the alleged mummy of Booth in circus sideshows until after World War One. Dear God! I thought Bates, I thought Bates was like the most reasonable one out of everyone, and he wants to profit off it just as much. And look at that! I said circus. I said P.T. Barnum. I wasn't wrong. You know what this sounds exactly like? The the outlaw Elmer McCurdy, the guy that died in like 1889, but his body was moved for sideshows and it was on display. And they actually found it in an episode of the $6 Million Man in the '70s when somebody found out that it wasn't actually a prop but an actual body, and it was the body of Elmer McCurdy. This sounds exactly like that. The body was shown at the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair, but was rejected. But was rejected by the 1933 Chicago World's Fair. In 1920, Bates tried to interest the automaker Henry Ford in buying it for $1,000, but Ford refused. What is happening? What is happening? This episode is going off the freaking rails. What the fuck am I reading? What? Oh my god. The body was shown at the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair, but was rejected by the 1933 Chicago World's Fair. That means he had the body for over 20 years. Like, what does it look like? What does it smell like? Is what I want to know. In 1920, which I would imagine was what now? 16 years later, Bates tried to interest automaker Henry Ford in buying it for $1,000. Why the fuck would Ford want a dead body of John Wilkes Booth, supposedly John, or any body for that matter? It's not a car. Why did? Oh God, I'm afraid to read more. Oh, I'm afraid. Oh God, I'm mortified right now. William B. Evans, who died on May 19th, 1935, a charter member of the Showmen's League of America, who was known as the Carnival King of the Southwest, rented the mummy in 1920, paying Bates $1,000 every 5 months. How do you make easy money in 1904? You rent out a mummy for $1,000. No punchline. That apparently really happened. In 1920, oh, it was 1920, my bad. In 1920, while traveling to San Diego, the mummy came out unscathed from a train wreck where 8 of Evans's employees and many of his circus animals died. Before Evans could re-establish a tour, the mummy was kidnapped. Evans ran ads in the billboard, offering $1,000 for its return. Ultimately, the kidnapper himself turned in the mummy for its reward. Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh. Ultimately, the kidnapper. Okay, we read that part. Evans wanted to return it to Finis Bates, but Bates had died in 1923. Bates' widow sold the mummy to Evans for $1,000. Wait, I'm confused. I don't know. Evans moved to a potato farm in Delco, Idaho, where he displayed George's body in a Pullman train car. A Kansas City lawyer and expert on John Wilkes Booth examined the mummy in 1928, comparing its scars to those of John Wilkes Booth, and began touring the Southwest with it, incorporating as the American Historical Research Society. Enraged by its presence, veterans of the Grand Army of the Republic. Finally, someone's outraged. Like, this man's body has, like, for 30 years, has just, like, 20 plus years, whatever, has just gone, like, virtually as a tour, like an exhibit. And finally, someone is outraged. Enraged by its presence, veterans of the Grand Army of the Republic threatened to lynch the mummy. But it's supposedly a dead body. This isn't gullible. This now just sounds absolutely insanely stupid. Wilkerson and Evans were often run out of town by health officials and policemen, and ultimately the two disbanded. Evans died in 1935, killed during a holdup in Chicago. In 1931, the Chicago Press Club hired 6 doctors led by Dr. Orlando Frank Scott to examine the mummy. Okay, we're gonna skip that. The results were non-conclusive nor widely accepted. The event was viewed as a publicity stunt, and the doctors did not examine other elements such as height and facial features. X-rays from the examination were later displayed with the body, which now had a large opening in its backside as a result. No shit! I mean, 20 plus years you've been carrying this dead freaking carcass around. In 1932, Joseph Barney Harkin. Why did they always give the middle name? Like, I don't need to know the third, like, I don't know, of the wallet or whatever, of the circus. He's from a circus. He bought the mummy and named the name John for $5,000. Up, the price went up. So this body's still floating around, being sold, and now it's up to 5,000. Joseph and Agnes Harkins shared the back of a truck with John by night and displayed him by day. Ultimately, in 1937, Harkin teamed up with Jay Gould's $1 Million Spectacle, which displayed John for 25 cents admission. It was eventually seized as collateral for debt repayment. Oh God, we're 22 minutes in. This could be we could go for an hour. Like, I'm so intrigued right now. I don't know about the rest of you. In the 1950s, oh my God, the we're up to the we're up to the 50s. This beats Elmer McCurdy, I think, by a landslide. For 70 years, yeah, Elmer McCurdy's body was around for like 70 years. I think we're almost there. We're up to like 90 years. In the 1950s, John was stored in a Philadelphia basement. R.K. Verbeck purchased John from a female landlord who held it as collateral from a man who died owing her rent. What the fuck? Verbeck paid $15 and in 1958 traveled back to Philadelphia to claim it. But when he arrived, the entire neighborhood had been razed and John was gone. It was last seen in a Midwestern carnival in the late 1970s. See what I mean? I'm thinking maybe, as fucking crazy as this episode is, pardon my language, I think maybe they're confusing this guy's body with Elmer McCurdy. Because if not, these two, I'm writing a friggin' story on them. This is nuts. Oh my God. In 1907, Finis L. Bates published a book that supports his claim that the mummy of George was, in fact, the corpse of Booth. The book was published with several variations on the title. Memphis publishers, okay. In order to understand how and why Henry Ford became involved with Finis L. Bates in the controversy over the alleged escape of John Wilkes Booth, it will be necessary to set forth a little background information on some of Ford's activities from 1916 to 1925. Okay, so there's actually, I'm not going to read this, but there's a whole thing on why Henry Ford might have been interested in the body. Oh my God. Oh my God. I don't even I don't even think I have theories. Oh my God. I'm so mortified right now. Oh my God. Okay. All right, so we're not gonna go an hour. Oh my God. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to process everything I just read. Like that was insane. I think maybe whoever wrote that got him confused with Elmer McCurdy. They must have. You can't tell me there was two bodies out there like that were just passed around person to person, sold for $1,000, then $5,000, then $15, and circus and carnivals. Like what? Uh, okay, so back to the episode at hand. Did John Wilkes Booth survive that night that he was gunned down, or the night that he died in the barn? Let me just address everything here very quietly, very calmly. Do I think John Wilkes Booth survived? Do I think John Wilkes Booth was John St. Helen? Do I think maybe he was David E. George? Were they all one and the same? Here is my opinion. I think John Wilkes Booth died in the barn. Why anybody would claim to be John Wilkes Booth after he was killed? I don't know. Maybe you want some sick, weird, controversial notoriety. I don't think he was John St. Helen. Maybe he was John St. Helen's, but I don't think he was. But if out of the two people that supposedly he was, I would say he was John St. Helen's way before I would say he was David E. George. Because if he was David E. George, don't you feel like he got what he deserved? Like if he killed Lincoln, if that was the guy that killed Lincoln, then that means for 90 years his body was dragged and bought and just on display. Like just the thought of that is just, I don't know. But no, I do not think that those two men were John Wilkes Booth. Booth died in the barn, plain and simple, plain and simple. Everything I just read about that body, that was something else entirely. Like we were just doing another episode in an episode. What do you think? Do you think John Wilkes Booth died in the barn? Or do you think he was John St. Helen? Or was he David E. George? Was he both? I'd say give me your thoughts, but you're not going to. And if you, by some miracle, do, please, I'd love to hear it. This has been a crazy ass episode of Mystery Unsolved. John Wilkes Booth. Until next time.